And we are rolling on October 26th, a Thursday, where it's a beautiful day in Los Angeles. The sunshine is shining. It's a little warm. And we are about to go into part 2 of our videotaping today, where we're hearing reports on the prison brace. And is this affirmative or negative?
Affirmative.
Another affirmative. Boy, we're getting affirmatives in a row. And we're getting an affirmative look at the question, does America lock up too many prisoners? And we're hear from Emily Chen.
Hi, I'm Emily.
Hi, Emily.
This proposition is to be presented as a policy case in the affirmative that the U.S. does lock up too many prisoners. And the criteria and standard of judgment that will be used will be established by the statistics regarding the crime and incarceration rate, as well as the research results collected from studies conducted on reducing the prison population. Now, what is the problem? The problem is simply that the United States locks up too many criminals, resulting in our prisons overcrowding. Although the result is that our American prisons are overcrowded, the actual contributory problem is a lot more complex. Prison overcrowding exists because we arrest too many criminals and use cookie-cutter sentences that hold these offenders in prison for longer than necessary, which creates both an economic and political pandemic. Matt Ford, in his 2017 article, America's Uneven Crime Spike, published in The Atlantic, writes that the latest Uniform Crime Report from the Federal Bureau of Investigations notes that the recent spike in crime has not been mitigated by the election of politicians who are, quote-unquote, law and order oriented or tough on crime. CJCRML's 2017 article in Reason stated that the Illinois Senator Dick Durbin and Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley moved to introduce a bipartisan bill to overhaul federal sentencing guidelines and reduce mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for repeat nonviolent offenders with no serious felonies. This bill was shot down in 2015, but Durbin and Grassley have plans to reintroduce the bill, showing that politicians and legislative communities across America recognize the inequity and efficiency of the mandatory minimums and realize the large role that they play in contributing to prison overcrowding. So how big is the problem? Prison overcrowding is one of the largest problems plaguing the penal system today. However, this problem is fueled by an array of causes, which all must be addressed in order to resolve the problem. An article published in the Vallejo Times-Herald in 2017 tells us that a man in prison for murder in Napa County who shot his 21-year-old neighbor, who, when brought in by the prison police, was discovered to be in possession of illegal drugs, abnormally large sums of cash, and an armory of guns, was recently granted parole due to prison overcrowding. The article continues to state that, due to a state-induced pressure to reduce prison populations, California has implemented a variety of programs in order to reduce the prison population, such as the medical parole, compassionate relief, and elder parole programs. These programs dictate that inmates over the age of 60 that have served at least 25 years of their sentence are eligible to receive an elderly parole hearing, even if they were originally found to have committed serious or violent sex crimes and murders. This is not the solution to our prison overcrowding woes. The solution will entail a multiple-pronged approach, attacking the fallacy of the mandatory minimum sentencing norms, as well as funneling less time, energy, and money and resources into arresting people for petty crimes and redirecting that towards rehabilitation. Now, why do we have this problem? The problem of prison overcrowding has many contributory factors, but the main reason is due to the arrest of nonviolent offenders and the use of mandatory minimum sentencing. A 2016 article in the Activist Post noted that the Greene County Jail in Springfield, Missouri, had to stop arresting actual criminals because the jail was filled with nonviolent offenders. Additionally, Bill Keller, in a New York Times article published in 2014, mentions that lawmakers have recoiled from the high price of mass incarceration, which the annual per-inmate cost of prison approaches the tuition at a good college. And some lawmakers have recognized that our prisoners feed a pathological cycle of poverty, community dysfunction, crime, and hopelessness. We have a culture that revolves around being seen as tough on crime. Things like the 3 strikes law, mandatory minimums, and requirements that felons serve a minimum portion of their sentence, usually 85%, lengthen the time that offenders spend in prison. Although the mandatory minimum sentencing was originally implemented to fight the war on drugs, it has stood in place long enough to evidence its inefficacy. An article published in the Washington Square News in 2017 stated that mandatory minimum sentences have failed in their promises to upend large-scale drug operations and lessen drug-related crime. Additionally, they have dehumanized the defendants and lessened the incarceration rate substantially. Mandatory minimum sentencing keeps these nonviolent offenders in prison for longer than necessary, while wasting money and resources that could be applied towards rehabilitation. A 2017 article from the Washington Post states that mandatory federal drug sentencing is unforgiving. Because of the increase in prisoners, the prisons are left without inadequate resources and funding in order to provide the necessary and proper rehabilitation to its inmates. The Post article continues to show that mandatory minimums have not worked to combat crime, as a 2014 study by the U.S. Sentencing Commission found that defendants released early were not more likely to reoffend when compared to prisoners who have served their whole sentences. Additionally, these sentences have not proven to be cost-effective. The Post article continues to note that the federal prison costs have skyrocketed to $7 billion, which is more than a quarter of the Department of Justice's budget. And this cost is being driven by a population that is nearly half drug offenders. But it appears that efforts are already being made in order to abolish the mandatory minimum sentencing. Individual states are already rallying for the abolishment of mandatory minimums and refocusing their attention on redirecting the save funds towards programs that will refocus on rehabilitation. Bill Keller for the New York Times writes that we release over 650,000 prisoners back into society each year, and 2/3 of them are rearrested within 3 years because they have dropped on a curb and left to fend for themselves, reduced through the options of homelessness, unemployment, and return to crime. We need to implement programs that help felons transition out of the prison and back to becoming a member of society. Now, what is the solution? The solution will be a multi-step process that first attacks mandatory minimum sentencing, and then is followed by the implementation of programs to reduce recidivism rates, and then introducing split sentencing into the system. The solution begins with the end of the mandatory minimum. Mandatory sentencing and punishment means that judges do not get to weigh the facts of a crime on a case-by-case basis and dole out an individualized punishment. And split sentences offer a blended sentence combining rehabilitation along with time in prison, and have been proven to show lowered rates of recidivism and subsequent acts of violence. A study by American Ucla and Lawrence M. Wine, published in the Public Library of Science in 2015, used a model representative of the LA County system that tracked the flow of individuals during arraignment, pretrial release or detention, case disposition, jail sentence, and possible recidivism during pretrial release. And they found that offering split sentences to low-level felons optimized the key trade-off between public safety and jail congestion, reducing the rearrest rate to 7% while also reducing the prison population by 20%. Now, I believe that passing legislation to end mandatory minimums and stop committing these non-violent offenders to extensive sentences is the best way to reduce the prison population. 2017 Economist article states that shoving more and more low-level drug violators in prison for long stints may make good sense if the harsher punishments discourage crime, but the data shows otherwise. Mark Maurer from the Sentencing Project says, research over many decades have demonstrated the deterrent effect of the criminal justice system is a function of the certainty of the punishment, not its severity. Furthermore, increased supervision on newly released prisoners can help ensure that probation is less of a revolving door back to prison. By locking up these non-violent drug offenders to a sentence more appropriate in relation to the crime that was committed will help reduce the prison population.
Okay, sum up your on balance now. You're out of time.
Okay. On balance, I believe that the advantages of implementing such legislation to end or reduce mandatory minimums, assign sentences on a case-by-case basis, and utilize split sentencing dramatically outweighs the disadvantages and will yield the greatest results in reducing our prison population and even towards reducing the recidivism rate, which can ultimately play a large role in reducing the overall crime rate. And I now stand open for cross-examination and points of clarification.
Very nice. Thank you, Emily. Okay, rock and roll, sir. What's your name?
Jarrett.
Spell it.
Jarrett.
Jarrett. Great. Okay, rock and roll, Jarrett.
So especially the second half of your argument kind of revolved around drug offenders and them being defined as non-violent. So I would first like to begin by asking, do you have a specific definition of what a drug offender actually is? Like, does that just mean possession? Does that just mean something else? So can you please offer that if you have it?
Sure. Under the current sentencing system, they are treating drug offenders and people that are in possession with an intent to sell and committing them to the same sentence. And so that would be the difference. I mean, someone that's a first-time offender who just possesses drugs is being committed to the same length of sentence as someone that's been doing this repeatedly with an intention to distribute. So I believe that there's a big difference between the two, and they should not be treated the same in a court of law.
Okay. Do you have actual statistics or any evidence as to what amount of those drug offenders are, for example, walking down the street holding a blunt and then put in jail as the same amount of somebody who would be running an international drug ring?
You're right. There is a smaller proportion, but the statistics do show that over 65%, I believe, of the drug offenders that are in jail, they don't specify which. They do say low risk offenders, and so that would mean the ones that are not running the drug, like the rings. So it's just people that are simply in possession.
Okay.
Even if they have offended once or twice, they're not held at the same standard as people that are operating these rings.
Okay. And do you know if that percentage of people who are arrested for possession, for example, that small majority that you just pointed out, do you know if any of them are also indicted under separate charges, such as possession of a weapon or something a little bit more serious, or is it people who were just having that type of drug and were walking down the street or something like that?
1 minute left.
The sources that I use specifically say that they are solely arrested for drug convictions. So they were not in possession of anything else illegal. So it was just for drugs.
Okay. And then in addition, you talked about kind of leveling the playing field and allowing judges to be able to make decisions based on case by case. Do you think that that is slightly dangerous because you are not setting a standard in which legal procedure should go? So it's kind of, you never know which way one case is going to go. So maybe one case goes the way that you would want it to based on your argument, and another one goes the exact opposite because it's two completely different judges that are making that decision.
That is one side of the argument, but then there are also many cases where judges have come out and said that they believe that the sentence that they were forced to charge the felon with was unfair because they themselves did not believe in the sentence being appropriate in relation to the crime that was committed. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Stay up there for some feedback. Let me make some comments really quickly. Jared, your cross-ex was pretty good. You made some good inroads into her case about trying to draw the distinction, go over that a little bit, drawing the distinction between people that had joint and people that had 10 kilos of cocaine. And, there's a difference. They all clump together. And the low risk, I don't know about these low risk people being let out. There's looking like a spike in the crime rate in California. So anyway, I think you were on the right track with a lot of your questions, and you were on the right track demanding her evidence and her proving her assertion. So I like that. Emily, thank you. Really excellent job. I really thought it was very, very good. Especially good in citing your citations. It was modeled in that way. You cited them fully and you gave the dates, and they were all from the deep internet, and they were all real recent, and they were good quality sources. So I have no problem with them whatsoever. Yeah, and this thing about the Vallejo Times Herald, I guess you put that in as an example of letting bad guys off. Is that what you were trying to show there? Yeah. And So the other thing is that Jarrett didn't get into it, but this whole question of releasing sex offenders back into the general population, even though they're elderly, seems to me to be problematic. The research I've seen is the recidivism rate among these people is extremely high, and there's no effective treatment for that. So I think they need to stay in for life. In my opinion. Yeah. Why do we have the problem? Yes, you very correctly found the structural inherency that exists. You correctly found the mandatory minimums, and you had good evidence that talked about how it was going, and that was excellent. I like your Economist in 2017 article on your solvency. Wish you had timed this a little better, edited it a little better, so you could have talked about your advantages. Needed to get to those, because those are things that are persuasive to your audience. But I think that you made the case that we do lock up too many, and you presented a prima facie case for the proposition, and a good Chicago citation and bibliography. So thank you very much. Very good. Okay. Your turn.
Feel free to this one.
Yeah. Okay.
Jared's timing.
Jared's timing you. Okay, good. And who wants to do the cross-hatch? Are you prepared? I don't want to joke process.
Huh?
I don't want to joke process.
I'm not prepared right now because he hasn't talked yet.
Anybody else want to do the cross-hatch? Yeah, I'll have you do it. Okay.
Now,
Yeah?
my topic is on the United States locks up too many prisoners, and I will be arguing in the case of the affirmative. To start off, I want to just say how large our prison population is probably going unnoticed. So, according to the CDC of 2015, from 1982 to 2000, California's prison population increased by 500%. That means that in California alone, 23 new prisons at a cost of $280 million to $350 million were created. Also, there's roughly 2.3 million inmates in the United States, 1,719 state prisons, 102 federal prisons, 942 juvenile correctional facilities, and 3,280 local jails, according to prisonpolicy.org and the GOP of 2012. But let's talk about the problem. The problem is that our legal system is corrupt, and it starts in the courtroom. You know, a question to ask somebody is how much time do you think how much time do public defenders have to work on their case? Some people may not know. Well, let me state 3 places. Atlanta, 52 minutes. Detroit, 32 minutes. And then Louisiana, 10 minutes. I don't know about you guys, but I cannot prepare for a test in 10 minutes, let alone 52 minutes like that. But now they have someone's life in their hands. But how is this supposed to be a legal system if we're not even allowing our own, what we're protected under by the Constitution of the 6th Amendment to protect us as the United States, which is the right to fair trial? Many people in the U.S. lack financial stability to afford a private attorney, so over 70% of citizens use the public justice system, according to VeriInstituteForJustice.org. For instance, in New Orleans, the public defenders' budgets are being cut by a bit more than $1 million, and these defenders will still have to work for incoming caseloads while they're on a freeze by the government by hiring more employees. This means that each public defender on a payroll will have to double even more than the workload they have. According to the New Orleans American Bar Association, recommends that public defenders work on no more than 150 felony cases per state, but last year they doubled that. An interview done by 60 Minutes on public defenders states that many lawyers didn't even see their case until 10 minutes, not even the case, didn't even see the person until 10 minutes, until entering the courtroom. Another reason why our legal system is unfair is due to a limited number of resources and enough time to gather information to prove that the client is not guilty. For instance, by the DOJ having their budget cut means that the public defenders won't have the financial ability to go into detail into the private clients' lives. And this punishment, rather than giving a punishment that fits tailor-made to the crime, they give a broad punishment, just so they could get the case moving. According to Idaho, public defenders are required to take, we're taking double the workload while also handling private clients. This means that while they're getting paid for the private clients, they would use the rest of the time to handle their public clients, which one's going to pay the bills? Someone could ask that question or answer it. How big is the problem? Our problem is very big. We don't have enough, once again, like I stated, they don't have enough time to go over cases. The DOJ is having their budget cuts, and this means they don't have the financial ability to go over clients' lives. But let's go into why do we have these problems. Prosecutors often feel that they don't want to drag on cases, so they offer the defendants basically a plea that, just take it, or you're not going to move up the ranks because judges don't want to deal with that 24/7. Or if you do this, you're not going to be able to handle your caseload. According to the Department of Justice, a typical way of stopping a person's typically a way of stopping your progress of moving up in the ranks by judges. This was done by a study of people internally in the DOJ. People were then questioned why do they not actually argue for the clients. They say that it possibly was stopping and moving up the ranks. In California's legal system, the prosecutor's budget is $300 million. Well, the defendants of the DOJ system, they're actually less than $300 million. They're negative. They're down by $300 million. That means they don't even have the adequate funding to represent their clients and the people they're going against. That's not an even playing field. Also, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics 2015, America spends less money on public defense per capita than every European Union. How can we say we're the land of the free when we can't even give adequate funding to the same legal system that promises fairness? On average, a person who cannot afford to pay their bond will have to remain in jail for around 60 days until district attorneys decide to arraign them. That means, say they're not even being charged, they're being charged but they haven't been convicted, they're in jail sitting there for 60 days. In another instance is in Louisiana. There's 18,000 felony cases, and only 9 detectives are assigned to 18,000 felony cases. That's all they can afford. So what is my solution? We could solve this problem that's stated above by hiring public defenders that actually care about upholding the Constitution and preparing each case and putting forth their best effort. And having a second critical eye watching over them. Another way for my proposal to work is that we have public defenders have a lower caseload, and we stop trying to criminalize small things. Most people do not know that the caseload, even though most people in jail are not misdemeanor crimes, the public defenders are spending most of their time on misdemeanor crimes. They're just not being sent to jail, which takes away from having to deal with felonies. According to the National Advisory Council of Criminal Justice, they state the average public defender is supposed to spend 500 hours for each client, and they do not have that. They're not even close to that.
1 minute.
Will the solution work? First off, this will be a good solution, and it will work because it's cost effective. If we take around $75 million from, say, the military budget, which is not even a fraction, we could hire over 30 attorneys to each state in the United States for just $75 million. To make sure the proposal is not just a theory, is that we will just take a lower stance on minor drug offenses and focus on felonies. The advantage of my proposal is that we solve the core problem if we do this, and this is a pretty core problem because it starts in the courtroom before we actually go into the prison. By implementing this plan, that means that people who could have committed a crime, but since their bonds were also not set to a reasonable amount, they'll be able to solve this problem and stay out of prison, and that way it lowers down the amount of people in there. And on balances, I believe that my solution will solve this, and now I stand open for cross-examination.
Thank you very much. Very nice. Okay, who's doing the cross-X?
I am.
Okay, move up quickly, please. Thank you. Very nice. There, good. Begin.
Hi, so you made,
What's your name?
Nilu?
Nilo?
Yes.
Hi, Nilo.
Has that time started? Okay. For the comment you made on public defenders, does it take into account how many years of experience they have when they're given only 52 minutes?
When they're no, it does not take into account.
Well, wouldn't you say that a public defender who has over 20 years of experience would understand the legal system and how it works and what to argue when coming up with the case?
I would agree with you on that, but the problem is that not every single legal case is the same. Every legal case is different. It has to be tailor-made. So even if they say they do know what the normal sentence for a drug crime is, let's say that they're carrying a different type of drug. Say that this person possibly there's circumstantial evidence. Everything goes into the case. It's just not the same. So.
And I agree with that. But doesn't the legal system in the U.S. use precedent over cases used before to argue for cases that are happening currently? So that would use old cases in order to get away with.
The problem is that even then, that may be a problem in itself, is that we're using precedents such as that to argue for these cases. But even then, there's cases that will bring up new problems. So just because there is precedents beforehand doesn't mean there is now.
And you mentioned that public defenders are the problem and not prisoners, or the criminals.
Don't look at him, look at the judge and the audience. They're the people you're trying to persuade.
Okay.
He's just playing a game with you. An intellectual game. Okay, good.
So you mentioned that public defenders are the problem and not the criminals themselves. Wouldn't you say the criminals put them at risk to getting incarcerated because they're the ones that are committing the crime, not the public defenders who are defending them?
I would always like to remind people that isn't our Constitution say that we're innocent till proven guilty, not guilty till proven innocent? So they're not. They're not criminals. First off, they're innocent people until proven otherwise.
Okay. And you mentioned that people that are going to be incarcerated are in jail for 60 days who can't make bail. Wouldn't you say that that's their own problem for getting into an incident that they were...
Well, that's the question. Does that mean that everyone does everyone deserve something just because that's what it looks like? I mean, if you see someone walking down the street, you thought it was your friend, it ends up getting close, it's not really your friend. It ends up being someone that you thought it was. So not everything as it seems, and judges have been saying outrageous bail amounts for each client. So just what they deserve, the price, is different from what actually should be, what they were assigned from what they should.
And as for your solutions, you mentioned that you wanted a second critical eye. How would that be reasonable with our budget and deficits that are happening right now?
Well, for prosecutors alone, they're over $300 million above the defense, the DOJ, so we could take something or at least get money to be equivalent to what they're having to support their cases. So we could take at least some money and put it towards us.
And I wanted to ask, did you have statistics for public defenders spending more time on smaller crimes rather than larger?
Yes. Should we go to that? Okay. One second. According to the Bureau of Economics Analysis of 2012.
Do you have the statistics to prove it?
No, I just have the Bureau of Economics Analysis.
Okay, thank you very much. Stay up there for some feedback. Nilo, you asked some good questions. Remember to focus on the audience and have a goal. I know you tried to probe some of his evidence and the assumptions that his evidence made, which was excellent. So I think you were able to punch some holes there, especially when he didn't have any evidence to back up his claims. So that was good. Brandon, well, we had a real unique affirmative case here, which I appreciate you doing. You took sort of a slice of the criminal justice system and didn't take the whole big ball of wax. Which I appreciate. Well, you listed how big the problem was under your definitions. They really didn't belong there. Okay, so stick that over there under the significance of how big is the problem. And remember to put in some sort of criterion for how to evaluate whether we lock up too many or not. And in your case, it would be something about the quality of their representation, you know. Yeah. You did a pretty good job of citing your sources. Remember to cite the dates every time when you're reading them. You talk about public defenders being doing very superficial jobs
Yes.
on their clients, and you know, say this graciously, but many of these cases are pretty open and shut,
Yeah.
and they don't require a full-born investigation and trial and all the pleadings and everything. But your point is well taken. If they do want to have that, it should be available to them, even though that many of these are just deserve to be pled out, you know. So, why do we have the problem? It goes to the attitude of the system toward the criminal and toward public defenders. It's just like the attitude of why we don't have more rehabilitation programs. And people hear about prison overcrowding, and they shrug, and they go, it's prison. Should be overcrowded. Well, so what? You know, that's their punishment, right? And no one's as overt as that, but that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And the same with public defenders. You know, these guys that demand a trial are usually guilty as hell, and they're just wasting our time.
That is true.
You know. And no one really, even though everyone has right to counsel, you know, what passes for right to counsel, your point is well taken, in the public defender realm is seriously lacking. Your solution of hiring more public defenders was fine. What I would like you to do, though, is link it back to the question at hand. Would this result in more people being locked up or less? I didn't get the link. Your argument is less, right?
Yes.
And so link that back to the question at hand, so we don't get off on our tangent of arguing public defender money and forget about the central question of do we lock up too many people or not. Yeah, work on your time so you have time to read everything and get it out. And let's look at your bibliography. Your bibliography was good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next.
You don't have time. 8 minutes left.
8 minutes left. Someone want to try to do it? Someone wants to try to do it? Okay. No one wants to try to do theirs in 7 minutes?
I get problems with mine, it's less.
No time for cross examination.
No time for cross-examination for critique, but we could, just stay in here. I don't think there's a class. Is there a class that comes in here after?
I have a class after
In this class? Oh, you have to leave immediately.
I have a 4 o'clock class.
Okay. Well, okay, yeah. I'm willing to hear you, Gil, but I look like I'm outvoted, but okay. Well, raise your hand if you still have a brief to give. Holy shit. Okay, we're gonna have to, okay, here's the dealio. Okay. Here's the dealio. Next time, I'm gonna be a real hard ass, and the time is 5, and the cross-X is 2, and we will cut you off at 5. We'll just say thank you, cross-X, and that will be it. We will get everyone done next time. Okay? Return with honor. No, you hold on to your briefs until you present them. Since you have an extra week, no one should go over 5 minutes. And everyone should fully cite their evidence. Much the way we saw, where is she? I didn't see her. The girl in the black, is she gone? There she is. Very good job. Thank you.
I just wanted to tell you this is very interesting because as you start reading some of this, there's enough statistics to prove anything, any way.
Right.
I mean, it's just, and obviously there's been a lot written by this subject, and then the government spends millions of dollars pumping out statistics and records and whatever.
And that's true, yeah.
But what's interesting is the government's doing this on crime, but they stopped doing this on the environment.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Gil, what I would say to you is, this is the beginning of your intellectual maturity to
Yes, I should have started this a long time
to
ago.
recognize that there are no easy answers in any of these things, but we just listen to the best evidence we hear and then make a probabilistic decision based on what we hear.
And some of the statistics are qualified. The government puts qualifications on the statistics because of different communities and things like that. So, but this is very
Thanks for your comments, Gil. I'll now turn off the tape.
okay.
Tell us about your vacation. How was it?
It was excellent. I went to Morocco
Yeah,
For-
excellent.
a week and a half, went to Fez, went to the desert, and spent a couple days in Marrakesh. And
Ah,
it's a different way of
beautiful.
life. I mean, the cities go back 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And life hasn't changed that much.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad you got to get away, Gil. Thank you for sharing. We'll see you next week.
And I like it. You refurnished the classroom while I was gone.
Yeah, yeah.